Okay, so lesson 6 on the NEA, or non-examined assessment. Essentially this used to be called Coursework, but now it's called non-examined assessment. We're going to be looking today at page layouts and getting some page layouts designed. Something to keep in mind, I always like to start with a little bit of inspiration. As per Steve Jobs, be a yardstick of quality. Some people aren't used to an environment where excellence is expected. It's a really nice quote, kind of sets the tone. And to be honest with you, with the equipment and the software that we've got available today, there's no reason why you can't be excellent and truly produce something that's an industry standard. Okay? Cameras, equipment, software, it's all very accessible on a consumer level now. So, we should be trying to produce something that is that industry standard. So just to kind of recap where we are at the moment, component 3, which is your coursework piece, A03, assessment objective 3, is the assessment objective that covers this whole section. So you're required by the exam board to create media products for an intended audience. Key word there, an intended audience. So think about target audience. We've spoken a little bit about audience already, but just make sure that your product targets the intended audience. Yes, it may appeal to other audiences, but we have to ensure that we're targeting that intended audience. And it's an opportunity for you to apply your knowledge and understanding of the theoretical framework to communicate meaning. So what that means is you're applying the use of media language and your knowledge of that and your understanding of that, as well as representation, how your product should fit into an industry framework, and then also how an audience may respond to that, or how you target an audience. Okay, so make sure you use media language, and in your statement of aims, talk about how you've used that media language to construct a representation, to appeal to a certain audience, and to follow industry conventions. That's your opportunity to really justify your ideas. So far we've looked at product research, really important stage in the process, understanding what's out there already and what you're going to produce. We've looked at understanding different types of audience, who they are, how to reach out to them, how they might respond to your product. We've developed your ideas a little bit, so you should all have a chosen genre by now that you're working in and some rough idea of what it is that you want to produce. Today we're going to look at starting to design some page layouts, and then after this we're going to start to plan how you're going to actually bring that production to life. Okay, so this is internally assessed and externally moderated, just as a reminder. That means someone within the centre will internally assess your work, and then a sample will be sent off to Eduqas, which will be moderated. That's the external moderation part. The total number of marks available, just as a reminder, is 60. So you get a potential 10 marks for your statement of aims and intentions. So how well have you sort of set out what it is you're going to do? 20 marks up to 20 marks for creating a cross-media production that meets the requirements of the set brief. So that's essentially 20 marks for how well you have met the brief and how suitable your product is for the chosen form, genre. Does it follow industry conventions? Does it target an audience? So if you simply just do what the brief says, there's 20 marks available there. And then 30 marks for creating a cross-media production which uses media language to communicate meaning and construct representation. What that means in simple terms is up to 30 marks for how well produced your product is, essentially. It's kind of the simple way of looking at it. So the assessment is really based on the statement of aims and then the cross-media production. The two really need to work together. So, look at your statement of aims and make sure that it does set out what you have produced, essentially. Okay? That should be done beforehand, but in reality, when we make production, it is quite fluid in an industry form, and sometimes ideas take slightly different directions. And I think that's fine to kind of refine your statement of aims if you need to. The idea, though, is that you set out your ideas before you start producing them. Okay? So we'll assess you on your ability to create that cross-media production and to make sure that you've responded to the brief. Okay? Responding to the brief is a really big part of this, because in the industry, it is a big part of what we do. There's no point producing something really amazing if it doesn't meet the brief and if it doesn't target an audience. So it's really good that the exam board have put that in there. I know a lot of students kind of feel like 20 marks just for responding to this brief that's really very detailed can be a bit of a restriction on creativity, if you like. But I think it's really good the exam board have put that in there, because in a real world scenario, briefs are that detailed, and we really do have to make sure that we produce things that respond to those briefs. So bearing that in mind, let's have a little recap of the brief. We're looking at brief 2 here, okay? I've asked all of my students to respond to brief 2, option A, which we'll look at another day. But for task 1, this is the magazine brief. The main thing that we're really focused on here is this section here today, okay? Creating a front cover, double page feature article or double page spread, and a single page advertorial. There's a total of 4 pages there, and remember, there are 20 marks available just for meeting the brief, okay? So if we look at that brief again, we've got some detail on the right hand side of the screen here, saying what your front cover should include, what your double page spread should include, and your advertorial. Make sure you do all of those things, okay? You also have to construct representations of at least one social group. To be honest, it would be difficult not to do that, so that should come quite naturally, and include at least 8 original images in total, okay? If we break that down into a bit of a to-do list, these are the things that you need to do, okay? Although the double page spread is across 2 pages, I would treat this as 1 page layout just to ensure that it flows across the 2 pages. So make sure that you use a landscape design across those 2 pages. It is 2 pages, but it's 1 feature article, okay? At this stage, it's worth just sketching things out by hand before we switch over to InDesign and start designing some rough layouts. Just as a reminder, I would strongly advise against designing your layout in Photoshop. Okay, I know a lot of you are very competent in Photoshop, which is great, but it's actually really difficult to manage text boxes and automate the workflow that you would ideally need to produce a page layout within Photoshop. So for example, wrapping text around an image or formatting text in a frame is quite a pain to deal with in Photoshop, while in InDesign, this looks after a lot of these things for you simply with the click of a button, okay? So putting text into columns, wrapping them around images, InDesign will do a lot of that work for you, whereas in Photoshop, you'll need to manually do that. And then if your image changes for any reason, it's a real pain, very time consuming, okay? So if you have the skills to edit photographs and design artwork in Photoshop, that's great. By all means, utilize those skills, but then place those images and those bits of artwork within InDesign, okay? So the overall page layout should be designed in InDesign, and that's going to make things a whole lot easier for you. Certainly if you have to make changes and adapt things and that kind of thing. I often come back to this concept at this stage in the coursework, and it's not really a secret, but something that I find is kind of rarely discussed in the industry. We don't really have time as producers, I guess, to reflect on the way that we work and that kind of thing, but in teaching, you know, we do have the time to do that, which is great. So this is often the basis for creativity that most producers use. It sounds strange that we're encouraging you to copy something that already exists, but in many ways that's just the start of the process of learning how to create your own original work from scratch. So it does make perfect sense, because if every time I received a brief as a producer, I started with a fully blank sheet of paper and intended to create some brand new idea from scratch, I would be doing a lot of thinking and not much producing. And, in media, more often than not, we're dealing in a commercial environment. So essentially time is money. We need to come up with good creative ideas, and we need to come up with them as efficiently and as quickly as possible. So the start of that process is to always look for inspiration first. And this is what I always do when I'm briefed on producing something. We've done this together already in the research section of component 3. We found some layouts that you like the look of. So the next step is to then play around with these ideas on a page, combine them with your own thoughts and your own ideas, and start to transform them. Okay, and that's step 2 of this creative process. So some of the questions you would then be asking, what kind of photographs will you have access to make? Okay, so for example, a travel magazine, if you don't have photographs of a certain place, or if you're not likely to go there, let's be honest, at the moment, you're probably not likely to travel anywhere, none of us are, then that would make things very difficult. So think about what kind of photographs you will have access to be able to make. What kind of article are you going to write, and what kind of products and services do you have access to which fit into the brand and the genre which you could photograph? Okay, by the time we've answered all of these questions and come up with some ideas, then we've taken those initial foundation layouts and we've started to transform them into our own product. So this is essentially a form of guiding your creative process with research and inspiration, and by doing that, we're working along the right lines from an industry standard point of view, from a magazine conventions point of view, and you're forcing yourself in a way to create a product that meets the brief. So the more you do this, the less you'll lean on that research and that guidance over time. The more you go through this process, the more naturally it comes to all of us. But we all have to start somewhere, and this is a really good place to start. And today, this is an important part of the learning process, and it ensures that you're more likely to achieve a good result. In the long term, the bigger picture, the more you go through this process, like I say, the more comfortable you'll become with it, and the less you'll rely on it. Okay? So we're going to design some page layouts today, some mock-up page layouts. This is known as wireframing. There are some standards to follow when it comes to wireframing, but I don't want us to get too caught up on those today. Adobe does have an app called Adobe XD, which is designed for wireframing websites, print layouts, any kind of page layout really. And it's really quite an interesting app because you can then launch that user experience, and you can download a secondary app, and on your computer you can launch your wireframe, and on your mobile device you can experience it, test it out. So it is a really cool app for designing user experiences. By all means, give it a go if you've got access to your Adobe account and the App Store and the right devices to do it. It's quite a fun process to try out, and once you've done it a few times, you can really chuck things around on the screen and design layouts. It's really quite good fun. So I'll add a link to that in the description below. If, however, you don't have access to this and you want to go for a more old school approach, this is also a great way to get some ideas on the page. Okay, grab some sheets of paper, grab some pencils, a rubber, that kind of thing, refer to your research and design those 4 pages of layouts based on what you've researched. It's absolutely fine to literally copy the placement of text boxes and images if you want to, because you can then rub some bits out, move some things around, keep refining your layouts until you're happy that they look professional. Some people cut things out and move them around on the page. That can be quite fun as well. Use circles, use squares, various different polygons. Use big X's like what's on this slide here to identify where images are going to be placed. And you can lay font on top of those, or captions, or whatever you like. And then when you've identified what images you want, number them and create a list that describes what kind of images would go into which boxes. This is a really good process to go through, because looking at the slide that's in front of us now, I know that Eat Like You're at Home, if we're going to place an image there, I know that I need to shoot it to start with in landscape. I know that I'm going to need some dead space at the top for where that menu screen is. I know that I'm going to need a little bit of blank space in the middle to allow for that text and those buttons to be placed there. And I'm probably going to be following the rule of thirds, because that page layout in that image seems to follow the rule of thirds. Likewise, I've got an image on the right hand side here that's lower down the screen, that's almost like a panoramic image. So again, I probably would crop that after I've taken the photograph, but I need to ensure that the content falls within that kind of aspect ratio to make sure that image really works well for me. Over on the left hand side, this looks like a mobile app version of this website. We're going to need to ensure that those images are shot portrait, or if it's a dynamic website where it automatically changes from desktop to mobile. The images on the desktop version need to have content, fairly vertical content in the center of the page, so that when it gets resized to the mobile app, it lands in the right place. You don't need to really think about the website side of things, because we will use a website designer that kind of looks after that for you. But certainly from a page layouts point of view, it's good to visualize what images go on the pages, so that we can then compose images that suit that purpose. The chances of shooting a photograph that happens to fit around the text that you want, it may happen, but we don't want to play things by chance. We want to make sure that we're producing really professional layouts. So what I'll do is I'll leave the brief requirements up here as a kind of checklist, so that you can create those 4 page layouts, those 4 pages worth of layouts, and make sure that they meet the brief. And then you know exactly what it is that you're required to do. I'd actually suggest maybe get Spotify up, leave this page up on the screen. Feel free to pause the video here, and then you've got the brief up open in front of you. Get your page layouts designed, and then we'll move on to planning the production once you've got those page layouts kind of sketched out. If you've got any questions, by all means, just add them to the comments below.